I drove down that long Oklahoma highway expecting peace, the kind of peace you can almost hear breathing, the kind that hums between the wind and the fields, where every sound has a purpose. A crow somewhere far off, the soft whir of crickets, the dry rustle of corn moving like water. I wanted that quiet again. After months buried in policy meetings, crisis calls, and emergency orders in D.C., I wanted to remember what dirt smelled like after the morning dew burned off. My father's farm had always been my refuge. No cameras, no reporters, no lobbyists trying to twist my ear about airspace regulations. Just me, a fishing rod, and that stubborn old rooster nailed to the fence post that never stopped creaking in the wind. But when I turned off the main road and saw the dust rising ahead of me, my stomach sank. It wasn't the natural dust of a tractor plowing. It was thick, metallic, and loud, the kind that comes from diesel engines and bad decisions. The moment I stepped out of my truck, I knew something was wrong. The air didn't smell like soil. It smelled like asphalt. My boots sank into churned-up dirt marked by deep tire tracks and orange survey stakes stabbed out of the ground in neat little rows that sliced straight across my cornfield. I followed the sound, a deep rumble followed by the sharp beep-beep of reversing trucks. And there she was, Linda Harris, show president, the self-appointed queen of everything within 10 miles of here, wearing designer sunglasses like she was about to cut a ribbon at a grand opening. Behind her, 2 bulldozers crawled across my property, tearing the land into long, white-lined strips. For a second, I thought I was hallucinating. It looked like a construction site straight out of a civil engineering plan, flat, straight, and unmistakably aligned east to west. My years at the FAA kicked in instantly. That wasn't a road. It was a runway. I felt my jaw tighten. A runway, on my land. I almost laughed. A bitter, absurd kind of laugh, because if anyone in this state should have known better, it was me. I didn't spend 30 years in aviation oversight just to have an HOA build a landing strip on federal regulated soil. The irony stung like a mosquito bite you can't stop scratching. Linda spotted me almost immediately. She strutted over, her heels sinking into the dirt with every self-important step, her clipboard tucked under one arm like a scepter. "Well, well," she called, smiling like she was greeting an old friend. "If it isn't our absentee farmer. Decided to pay us a visit?" I leaned against my truck, crossed my arms, and tried to keep my voice calm. "Linda, what exactly am I looking at here?" She tilted her head, her smile sharpening. "Progress, John, we're modernizing. The new community charter passed 2 weeks ago. You would have known if you actually came to meetings." "Progress?" I said, glancing at the bulldozer carving through my pasture. "Because it looks a lot like you're paving my cornfield," Linda chuckled. "Don't be dramatic. It's all within the HOA's new jurisdiction zone. We're enhancing property value. The runway is part of our new executive airstrip project. Homeowners will love the convenience." I stared at her, wondering if she actually believed what she was saying. "Executive airstrip? On my property?" "Oh, John," she said sweetly. "Technically, it's community land now. Annexed in the recent expansion vote. You really should read your mail. That did it. My patience cracked clean in half. I run the Federal Aviation Administration," I said, each word deliberate. "You're building an unauthorized airstrip. Without permits, without consultation, on private land. And you're proud of that?" For the first time, her smile faltered. Just a flicker. Then she recovered. "I'm sure you'll appreciate the initiative," she said, dismissive. "The plans are already approved locally. Nothing you need to worry about." "Approved by who?" I asked. "The HOA committee." "Of course. The HOA. The same group that once fined my father for painting his barn a shade too red." I took a slow breath, forcing down the anger crawling up my neck. Bulldozers groaned behind us, the ground vibrating under my boots. I watched as they leveled the field I'd planted with my dad 25 years ago. Every clump of dirt that flipped over felt like another memory getting buried. Linda tapped her clipboard. "We'll be done with this section by the weekend. You might want to move that old tractor. It's right in the landing zone." I didn't answer. I just stared past her at the long white line stretching across the horizon, perfectly parallel to the prevailing wind. It was so textbook, so precise, that I could already visualize a Cessna touching down there. And I realized they weren't guessing. Someone had designed this. someone with actual aviation knowledge. This wasn't just an overambitious neighborhood stunt. It was coordinated. I turned back to Linda. You said this was approved locally. By whom exactly? The county? The zoning board? The FAA? She smirked again. Let's just say we have our ways. Don't get in our way, John. This is happening, with or without your blessing. And then she walked off, her voice cutting through the noise as she barked orders at the workers. I stood there alone, the heat pressing down on me, dust crawling into my lungs. For a moment I thought about my father, how much he hated bureaucracy, how much he trusted people to do right by each other. He used to say, land's not just soil, it's memory. Once you let someone else write on it, you never get the words back. I ran my hand through the dirt, trying to remember the last season we harvested here. That was before I left for Washington, before I traded calloused hands for microphones and congressional hearings. And now, standing in the shadow of bulldozers, I wondered if maybe leaving had been the first mistake. I got back into my truck, but I didn't start it. I just sat there watching the organized chaos unfold, the neon vests, the stakes, the spray paint marking my family's history like it was some disposable project. My phone buzzed, an email from D.C., some minor crisis about flight path recalibrations over Dallas. I ignored it. For once, the chaos out here mattered more. I looked out the windshield and realized something else. The workers weren't measuring just the runway. They were mapping extensions, taxi lanes, hangar plots. This wasn't a small project. It was an entire private airport. I stepped out again, this time walking closer to the machines. One of the foremen looked up from his blueprint, confused. "Hey, sir, you can't be here," he said. "Can't be here?" I echoed. "This is my land," he frowned, glanced at Linda in the distance, then back at me. "We were told it's HOA approved." "She said you signed off." I laughed, dry, humorless. "Did she forge my signature too?" He hesitated. "Look, I just do the grading. Who's your contractor?" I asked. He pointed toward a truck with a logo on the side, Red River Development Co. I snapped a photo. That name wasn't on any Federal Aviation contractor list I'd ever seen. I didn't say another word. I just walked back toward the fence line, phone in hand, already thinking 5 steps ahead. Linda thought she was building a runway. What she didn't know was that I had the power to ground every plane within 100 miles of this field before her first jet even touched down. As the bulldozers rumbled on, I looked out at the horizon, the endless expanse of land my family had held for generations, and I made myself a quiet promise. They could draw their white lines, dig their trenches, and issue their fake approvals. But I was going to stop this, legally, surgically, and publicly. If Linda Harris wanted a fight, she'd picked it with the wrong man, and that was the moment everything changed. The airstrip wasn't just an insult anymore. It was a declaration of war, and I wasn't about to lose the land my father built one row of corn at a time. I didn't sleep much that night, though it wasn't because of noise. My mind just wouldn't shut off. I sat at the kitchen table of that old farmhouse, the one that still smelled faintly of diesel, dust, and my father's pipe tobacco, and stared at the stack of papers Linda's workers had left pinned to my gate earlier that afternoon. Community Expansion Decree, it said at the top in bold font, stamped with the HOA logo like it was some official government act. I flipped through it slowly, page by page, every line more ridiculous than the last. They'd rewritten boundary lines, rezoned private farmland into shared community acreage, and attached 6 signatures that didn't belong to anyone I'd ever met. Somewhere between page 7 and page 8, they'd literally written the phrase, "for the betterment of collective homeowner experience." That one made me laugh out loud. It was like they'd cut and pasted corporate nonsense from a real estate brochure, but buried near the back, small font, legal jargon, I found what I was looking for. Section 9, Clause 14. The association reserves the right to develop aviation or transport-related facilities for community benefit. There it was. Their golden ticket. My father's land, my land, turned into a pet project for bored suburban visionaries. And the worst part? They'd filed it quietly with the county land registrar while I was in D.C. testifying before Congress. Perfect timing. By sunrise, I'd already called in a few favors. Old colleagues from the FAA, people who owed me their careers. I wasn't planning to weaponize the agency, not yet, but I needed to understand what I was dealing with. By 10 a.m., I had my answer. "John," my deputy said over the phone, "Red River Development isn't licensed for airfield construction. They're blacklisted. Environmental violations, unreported fuel storage, you name it. Whoever hired them either didn't do due diligence or didn't care." I exhaled slowly, leaning back in my chair. "That tracks," I muttered. "Send me everything you've got on them. I'll handle the rest." Outside, the bulldozers were already moving again. Dust clouds rose over the fields like smoke from a slow-burning fire. I could see Linda across the property, clipboard in hand, chatting with a man in a blue suit, probably another one of her hired consultants. I watched them from the porch for a while, drinking coffee that had long gone cold. She laughed at something he said, all smiles and self-importance, completely oblivious to how far she was stepping into federal territory. I walked down the gravel path toward them. Not because I wanted another argument, but because I wanted her to see me calm. The kind of calm that made people nervous. She turned when she heard my boots crunching. "John," she said brightly. "Perfect timing. We were just talking about the next phase, hangar foundations, flight path alignments." "Linda," I cut in, "you're not building a runway. You're building a lawsuit." The man beside her stiffened. "Excuse me?" I nodded toward him. "Who are you?" "Robert Grant, infrastructure consultant. I've done dozens of municipal projects like this one." "Municipal," I repeated. "You think this is a municipality? You're standing on private farmland in an unzoned county, working for an HOA that doesn't have jurisdiction to pave a driveway longer than 50 feet without a permit. You're trespassing." He blinked. "We have authorization." "From who?" I asked. "Linda? She can't issue federal clearances. She can't approve construction under FAA Part 157, and she definitely can't build anything within 1,000 feet of my barn without environmental clearance. You're violating at least 4 aviation statutes and 2 property laws right now." Linda crossed her arms. "John, you're overreacting. The county approved it." "Really?" I said. "Because I just got off the phone with the county commissioner. He has no record of this project." "You submitted false documents," her confident smile faltered. "That's ridiculous." "No," I said evenly. "What's ridiculous is thinking you can pave over federal oversight. You've broken more laws in 48 hours than most smugglers do in a year." The consultant took a step back. "Look, maybe we should pause," Linda snapped. "We're not pausing anything." I raised an eyebrow. "You should." But she didn't. She turned to her workers instead, shouting louder, pushing harder, pretending my words meant nothing. The engines roared again, the ground shaking beneath our feet. And that's when I decided it was time to stop talking. I walked back toward the house, grabbed my laptop, and started typing. Federal Aviation Notice, 22-9 temporary flight restriction. I filed it under safety review, airspace hazard due to unauthorized construction. Within 10 minutes, I had it signed and submitted to the system. 10 minutes after that, every drone, private jet, and crop duster within a 50-mile radius got an alert. No-fly zone established. Violation subject to $250,000 fine. The beauty of bureaucracy. It moves slow when you want it to, but lightning fast when you know which wires to pull. By noon, Linda's phone was buzzing nonstop. I could see her pacing from my porch, gesturing wildly, panic creeping into her perfect posture. The consultant was on his phone too, probably realizing his company just got flagged by the FAA. I smiled quietly to myself and poured another cup of coffee. She stormed over an hour later, dust on her shoes and fury in her eyes. "What did you do?" she snapped. I didn't bother standing. "I followed procedure," I said. "You should try it sometime. You shut down airspace," she shouted. "No," I said calmly. "I protected it." "There's a difference." Her hands trembled as she pointed toward the fields. "You can't just—" "I can," I interrupted. And I did. "That strip of dirt you're paving? It's now in a federally restricted zone. You bring in one more bulldozer and you'll have the Department of Transportation." the Environmental Protection Agency, and probably Homeland Security in your driveway by morning. For once, she didn't have a comeback. She just stared at me, speechless. Then slowly, her expression hardened again. "You think you can scare me with paperwork?" She hissed. "We have investors, John, real money. People who want this airstrip. You can't stop progress." I met her glare evenly. "Progress isn't the same as arrogance. You built this on lies, and lies don't fly." Her eyes narrowed, and without another word, she turned and walked back toward her group, whispering harshly to the consultant. I didn't need to hear the words. I could tell from her posture. She wasn't giving up. Not yet. I spent the rest of the afternoon on calls, first with the FAA Compliance Division, then with the Oklahoma Aviation Authority, then with a friend in the legal department of the DOT. Every one of them told me the same thing. "You're in the right." "John, but it's going to get messy. I didn't care." I'd spent a lifetime managing messy. This was personal now. By late afternoon, the bulldozers had stopped. The workers stood around uncertain, waiting for orders that never came. The air was thick with tension, the kind that comes right before a storm breaks. I stood at the edge of the field, watching the horizon shimmer in the heat, and I realized something. This wasn't just a property dispute. This was a battle over control, over who gets to decide what progress means. And as long as I was breathing, no HOA, no investor, and no self-righteous committee president was going to rewrite the rules on my father's land. The sun hung high overhead, hot and merciless. I could feel sweat tracing down my back as I whispered to myself, "You started this, Linda, but I'm going to finish it." By mid-afternoon, the tension on the farm felt like a held breath. The machines were silent now, bulldozers parked, stakes half-driven, workers standing around like extras in a paused scene. I stood near the first white line, staring at that stretch of bare earth where corn once grew. My heart thudded in my chest, not from fear, but from the weight of what was coming. I could feel it in every vibration in the soil, every whisper of wind through fields. The radio on my belt crackled. My deputy's voice, "FAA enforcement team inbound." I exhaled, straightened my shoulders. Good. It was time to end this. Margaret reappeared, flanked by half the HOA board, her face pale but determined. She clutched copies of the Community Expansion Decree in one hand, her nails digging into the paper. When she reached me, she tried to adopt that same cool composure she always wore. "John, this is unnecessary," she said. "You're making a spectacle." "I'm making sure the laws are followed," I replied. "You had every chance to stop this. You ignored it," she raised a voice. "You're trying to ruin the community." I shook my head. "No, I'm protecting it. You don't get to redefine land ownership because you have more connections. You can't pave over FAA jurisdiction." At that moment, sirens began in the distance. A line of FAA trucks rolled down the farm road, white, blue, logos shining in midday sun. Behind them came inspectors, surveyors, evidence teams with cameras and clipboards. The board members scattered. Workers rushed to their equipment. Margaret's face went ashen. Two enforcement agents approached. One held a folder. "Margaret Lang," the agent said, voice firm. "By order of the FAA and the U.S. Department of Transportation, operations on this unauthorized airstrip are to cease immediately. All equipment is to be secured." He flipped open the folder and read paragraphs from federal regulation. Title 14 of the Code of Federal Regulations. FAA Part 157, naming violations for failure to submit airport proposals, runway safety analyses, and obstruction clearances. Among others, Margaret stammered. "This is an overreach. It's private land, HOA authority, local zoning." The second agent cut in. "Your documents are incomplete, unauthorized, and invalid under federal law. You are required to remove all construction, restore the land to its original state, and submit to civil penalties." He handed her a copy of the enforcement notice. Her hands trembled as she accepted it. I stepped forward. "I gave you every opportunity," I said quietly. "You chose to violate the law." In that moment, something shifted. The board members looked ashamed. The workers exchanged glances. and the field stood silent save for the wind brushing through what remained of the stalks. Over the next hour, inspectors and enforcement agents coordinated. They measured the runway and compared the layout to FAA-approved charts. They took soil samples to assess disturbance, environmental reports to see habitat impact, noise assessments. They marked stakes that had been moved, painted lines to be erased. Every detail Linda and her board insisted was fine was scrutinized, logged, and photographed. Margaret hovered at the sidelines, her face flickering between defiance and panic. I expected her to try something, to make a last stand, but instead she just watched as the machinery was locked down, as the leads were told to stop, as the entire project was declared a violation and ordered halted. Then came the critical moment. One of the agents opened her expansion decree, that HOA document she'd forced onto my gate. He traced through signatures, checking them against county registrar records. A few names she'd forged, a few she'd misrepresented. More omissions than inclusions. He held up the document. This HOA has filed fraudulent paperwork. You've misrepresented property lines, misled neighbors, misused funds. The tension in the air snapped. Gasps from board members, murmurs among workers. Margaret's lips parted, but no sound came. I stepped closer. You told me it was approved. You called it progress. But this is corruption, betrayal of community values, and of law. My voice trembled with anger I didn't fully feel. Because I knew the battle was nearly over, agents moved in to dismantle unauthorized structures, foundation slabs, survey stakes, concrete mixers still in place. Contractors were asked to remove their logos and packaging. The chief agent told workers they had 5 hours to vacate the property and remove all equipment. Failure to comply would result in seizure and further fines. The board members argued, but their words dissolved in the afternoon heat. Margaret tried a plea. Please, let me appeal. I can fix this. I shook my head. No more fixes. This was never about upgrading. This was about power. And power needs accountability. I felt something inside me relax, the tension ease. Not because I'd won, but because justice was underway. Even in the bright noon sun, I felt the weight lifting. By mid-afternoon's end, the transformation was underway. Heavy equipment hauled away, concrete slabs chipped out, painted lines being washed or plowed under, topsoil brought to restore fields. Inspectors oversaw every inch. The community watchers and media vans lined the farm road. Reporters recorded with mics pointed, cameras rolling. Later, I walked the field again, but now it felt different. The ground was scarred but healing. Every churned patch, every erased line bore witness to what had been, and what would not be again. The air held the scent of fresh earth and something lighter. Relief. Margaret was escorted to her vehicle. I saw her pause at the gate, glancing back at what remained. A deputy placed her in a car. She looked at me once, eyes hollow, regretful. Then the door shut. No applause. No cheering. Just the quiet, real quiet, reclaiming this land. I crouched and ran my fingers through the earth. I remembered planting those rows with my father, his laughs drifting in the evening wind, the crows circling overhead. He'd passed years ago, but I felt him here now in the soil, watching, approving. I paced the expanse of my farm as inspectors cleared the boundaries, certified the land restored, and documented the reclamation. Contracts nullified, HOA dissolved, fines issued, legal notices pinned to bulletin boards in town. I oversaw the final signatures, accepted official closure reports, and told agents to send press releases, but asked them to spare the family details. This was mine, not a spectacle. A neighbor walked by on the road, an older man I'd known since childhood, and tipped his hat. Looks like justice came home, he said quietly. I nodded. Looks like it. As the trucks pulled away, the sun still high in the sky, I walked back to the farmhouse. I sat on the old front steps, boots dusty, shirt stained, heart pounding. I took in the fields. Green shoots tentatively pushing through the damaged soil, fence posts upright, wind stirring blades of grass. The peace I came home for had returned. Not soft, but hard-earned. It hummed alive again, carrying the scent of corn and dust, of sweat and resolve. At that moment, I realized something else. Victory doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it comes in the quiet, in the silence after the machines stop. Sometimes it comes with a breath, a whisper, a sigh. I stayed there as the day began its slow descent, watching the land. I thought of my father, and how many times he stood in this same field, dreaming of what it could be. I thought about the community, neighbors who'd been shut out, voices silenced. I knew this wasn't only my fight. It had become theirs, too. When the first cottonwood leaf fluttered down, I stood and walked to the gate. I leaned against it, looked both directions, and whispered, "You don't get to build your runway here again." Because now I held something stronger than concrete, the certainty that this farm, this land, was protected. And as a plane flew past miles overhead, I looked up. I didn't wave. I didn't acknowledge it. I just let it pass. The sky was theirs. The land was mine.